Hello everyone, welcome to this week's segment of Sherlock and Subtext. I am your host, Desiree, and today we'll be talking about the problematic execution of queerness in BBC Sherlock. We've talked at length about the subtext found in the series. There's a significant amount of dialogue, characterization, and visual cues that fall flat and don't add up when interpreted through a non-queer lens. This may sound like progress in the LGBTQ representation front, but there are a number of problems with the execution of queerness in the show. We can't tackle them all, but we'll be taking a closer look at three of their major missteps: queer baiting, queer coding, and queer tropes and stereotypes. Queer baiting is a social-cultural phenomenon whereby queerness is hinted at in media with no intention of following through with it. This is often done for the sake of attracting and profiting off of queer audiences without alienating viewers who'd object to such relationships. And queerbaiting is rampant in Western media, especially in audiovisual mediums such as film and television. Ambiguous sexuality and homoerotic subtext are often made into a punchline, especially if it involves two male characters. This is the case, for example, with Dean and Castiel from the American television series Supernatural, which is full of jokes based on the idea that the two men are more than friends. Common romantic comedy tropes are employed to suggest a romance between Dean and Castiel, something that the show's producers ultimately denied. Likewise, Sherlock is littered with references to a romantic relationship between John and Sherlock since episode 1. Sherlock frequently sabotages John's relationships and is presented as competition for John's girlfriends. John is defensive and consistently exhibits jealous behavior when Sherlock interacts with women, and there is a constant hinting at words and feelings unspoken from both parties. And even though the evolution of their connection is the central focus of the show, Sherlock and John never acknowledge their seemingly non-platonic feelings in earnest, which the creators settled to relegate to humor or to dismiss entirely. Stereotypes are widely held but fixed and oversimplified ideas of a particular type of person or thing. For example, homosexual men are often equated with heterosexual women. In media, they are frequently stereotyped as being effeminate, and they are associated with flamboyant body language, a meticulous appearance, fastidious grooming habits, and a penchant for partying. When Sherlock first meets his nemesis, Moriarty, Sherlock reads him as gay based on his signifiers of sexual orientation. These signifiers, however, fall under the stereotypical idea of a homosexual male.
Sherlock.
He's not gay. Why'd you have to spoil? He's not.
With that level of personal grooming? Because he puts a bit of product in his hair. I put product in my hair.
Wash your hair, there's a difference. No, tinted eyelashes, clear signs of taurine cream around the frown lines, those tired crabber's eyes.
Then there's his underwear.
His underwear?
Visible above the waistline, very visible, very particular brand.
Sherlock makes note of his use of hair and skincare products, the brand of his clothing, and his clover's eyes. This deduction perpetuates the idea that you can reduce someone's identity to a caricature, one that's based on what queerness is supposed to look like from a heterosexist perspective. Although Moriarty might have been performing as a gay man, given that he was in disguise at the time, he was still relying on stereotypes to signal his character's identity. We also take issue with Irene Adler, who had the potential to positively represent sexual fluidity and queer identities, but she is ultimately caught in the trope of a lesbian who hasn't found the right man. In A Scandal in Belgravia, her sexuality was initially the subject of speculation. It's revealed that she's gay, but her identity is then questioned and dismissed, while no attempts were made at consolidating this with an exploration of sexual fluidity. Her status as a gay woman is meant to be negotiable when Sherlock is involved. Her feelings for him become her weakness, ultimately leading to her downfall. This does Irene a great disservice, both to her character and to her sexuality. She should be praised for being the only woman to beat Sherlock Holmes in the canon. Instead, her identity is fetishized for the presumed heterosexual male viewer, who gapes at the fact that Irene is both a lesbian and a dominatrix. She's reduced to a potential love interest for the male lead after identifying herself as a gay woman, and loses because of her attraction to the man. In short, her sexuality was made flexible for the advancement of the plot, which is compliant with the heterosexist male idea that lesbians have to find the right man to correct them, an attitude that can and has led to violence towards queer women. Queer coding is when writers hint that a character is queer without explicitly stating that they are, and it's usually antagonists who are coded this way. This is not a coincidence. According to Harry M. Benshoff, author of Monsters in the Closet, for many people in our shared English language culture, homosexuality is a monstrous condition. Monster is to normality as homosexual is to heterosexual. Benshoff goes on to say that queer can be a narrative moment that negates the oppressive binarisms of the dominant hegemony, both within culture at large and within texts of horror and fantasy. Queerness disrupts narrative equilibrium and sets in motion a questioning of the status quo, and, as a result, homosexuality is considered threatening. In Sherlock, Holmes is depicted as the intellectual and sexually abstinent hero, which arguably makes sense given the canon's time period and the Victorian ideas of sexuality and purity of the time. Meanwhile, Morelli is overtly and, oftentimes, threateningly sexual, with no reason to justify this change. His sexuality becomes a part of his villainy, needing to evoke an abject reaction from the viewer, and this is not just limited to Moriarty, as it also happens with several of Sherlock's antagonists. In Season 3, Augustus Magnuson's repulsive behavior was often sexual in nature, such as when he caressed Sherlock when he was bedridden and unable to move. And in Season 4, the only allusion to Eurys's Holmes' identity as a queer woman is under the context of her rape of another woman.
Oh, have you had sex?
Why do you ask?
The music, I've had sex.
How?
One of the nurses got careless, I liked it. Messy though, people are so breakable.
I take it he didn't consent.
He?
She?
That's not good. All in all, this makes for poor representation. As someone who had high hopes for diversity and inclusion in this modern take of Sherlock Holmes, I must admit that its execution of queerness is problematic. It conforms to damaging tropes and stereotypes of LGBTQ individuals, reduces sexual identity to a plot device, and perpetuates the idea of homosexuality as threatening. That said, there are those who argue that the queer subtext found in Sherlock makes up for these missteps, claiming that it's sufficient to consider the show progressive. However, there's a big difference between overt and subtextual queerness. It's important for people to see themselves represented in mainstream media, especially in the visual culture that we live in. Subtext just doesn't cut it. It doesn't challenge the status quo. Case in point, queerbaiting is still being used as a marketing tactic to exploit queer audiences, and, unfortunately, successfully so. I don't mean to end this video on a disheartening note. I do think there's hope, especially as a new wave of diverse and progressive creators start creating and sharing their content, thus contributing to an all-inclusive representation and promoting its importance. This has been your host, Desiree. Keep those thinking hats on.